scene, the kind of video as we walk through it that just only reminds you of war scenes. And I guess one must say, as the experts we interviewed said, and so many people are saying all over the networks all day today, that this is war. This is terrorist war.
Incredible sight, Mark. Of course, terrorists, you remember, tried but failed in 1993 to blow up the towers of the West, as they are known by some across the world. And of course, this day they succeeded. These towers, just for a little bit of history, the towers were completed in 1976. They are, or were, I should say, immense in every detail. 43,000 windows, 99 elevators, all crumbled to the ground as we speak at this hour. They were designed to be especially sturdy. All the more horrific this scene is today.
And the most frightening, perhaps, remembrance we all have, or those who paid attention, Ramzi Youssef, who was the ringleader of the attempt to destroy these buildings in 1993, was being taken away by federal agents in a helicopter. And as they flew over Lower Manhattan, one of the FBI agents said to him, "Mr. Youssef, you see the World Trade Centers are still standing." And he said, "Yes, but if we had enough money, they wouldn't be." So many people are linking what happened today to Osama bin Laden, the man who was behind that other effort in 1993. Obviously, we can't say that, but we can speculate, as has been done all day.
And there is a lot of speculation about that attack, focusing on bin Laden. Of course, he's been given an asylum mark in Afghanistan. And it is interesting to note that today's attacks occurred one day before the scheduled sentencing of one of Osama bin Laden's associates. He was to have been sentenced tomorrow, or perhaps he still will be, in district court in Manhattan. His name, Mohammed Rashid Daoud al-Ahali. He was convicted of a terrorist bombing of the U.S. Embassy in Tanzania that claimed 200-some lives, more than 200 lives.
And I guess we should point out, in all fairness, that the government, the Taliban Muslim government of Afghanistan, has been on television today already, officials saying that they had nothing to do with this, and that as far as they know, Osama bin Laden had nothing to do with this. They seem to be trying to distance themselves from this disaster as best they can. We have just picked up some soundbite, local reaction, I think now, from area residents out at King of Prussia. Let's hear some of that sound right now.
I have two cousins at the Philadelphia airport right now trying to take off. They're obviously not going to be able to take off now. And my mom's going nuts. My dad's like freaking out.
As President Bush says, hunt down whoever did this to, our people in the United States and, take action.
I completely lost it. It was awful. It's terrible.
It's amazing. You'd never think this would happen in America. It's just, it seems like with all our government and our defense that we could really find ways to avoid this from happening here.
With all the flights being canceled, I'm trying to rent a car so I can get home. I have two kids and I just feel like you'd rather be home. We just mapped out a route. We're going to go up through Albany and cut across and then hop on the Mass Pike, hopefully, and hopefully it won't be as bad. I'm going to try to bypass as much as everything as I can. And then once I get to the Mass Pike, I'll be away.
We should tell you that we have just received confirmation that President Bush will return to the White House in Washington, D.C. to address the nation on today's horrific events at 9 o'clock tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And of course, we will carry that address live on Channel 6. Right now, let's go live to Anita Brickman. She is at Children's Hospital in Philadelphia with more on today's events there.
Lisa, all the hospitals are on heightened alert in case patients from New York City or Washington end up here. Here at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, they've called in extra staff. There's extra security at the doors, and they've also contacted their child life specialist. The psychological impact of this is not escaping anyone, especially on children. And we understand from the child psychologist we spoke to, children can be impacted greatly even if they have no connection to the actual events. Being a secondhand witness through the media, through what they hear from their friends, can be very traumatic to them, and some children will ask a lot of questions, others will withdraw and not say a lot, but stew over this, worry about it, become anxious, and feel personally threatened by what has happened in New York City and Washington, and they need their parents' help. These are some suggestions on helping a child deal with emotional trauma that can be very real to them as they witness a terrorist attack like this. Providing reassurance on safety is crucial. Telling a child personally that they are safe and that you as a parent are there to protect them. Holding, hugging, touching.
Well, then of course we really didn't do much to stop him with that earlier strike, and I think all that would argue for some
hostages for a number of days.
All right, Ms. Jenkins, I'm sorry to have to interrupt you here. We do have some late developments. As you see at the bottom of your screen, there are reports from CNN's Nick Robertson in Kabul, Afghanistan, of explosions there. I want to get some additional information now. CNN's Aaron Brown from his rooftop vantage point in New York. Oh, and actually, this is Nick Robertson now in Kabul. Nick, what can you tell us out there?
Well, Jerry, it's about 2:30 in the morning here in Kabul. We can hear explosions around the perimeter of the city. We're in a position here which gives us a view over the whole city. We just heard an impact perhaps a few miles away. If I listen, you can hear the ripple of explosions around the city. Perhaps we've heard there the sixth explosion. I see gunbursts and starbursts in the air. Tracer fire is coming up out of the city. I hear aircraft flying above the city of Kabul. Perhaps we've heard half a dozen to 10 detonations on the perimeter of the city, some coming from the area close to the airport. I see on the horizon what could be a fire on the horizon, close perhaps to where the airport might be. A flash came up then from the airport. Some ground fire coming up here in Kabul. A lot of flashing reflecting off clouds towards the horizon here. We thought that might have been a thunderstorm before. The detonations we're hearing now much louder than a thunderstorm. Also detonations very similar to those caused by large missiles. I've been in Belgrade and I've been in Baghdad and seen cruise missiles arrive in both those cities. The detonations we're hearing in Kabul right now certainly sound like the detonations of loud missiles that are coming in. We do see tracer fire going up into the air and hear the detonations towards the perimeter of the city, heavy air detonations we can hear now. It's what sounds like a lot of anti-aircraft fire going up.
One of the twin 110-story towers.
Places. There have been hundreds of people at area hospitals, as you note.
Incidents as well. A spokesperson for American Airlines says that they're continuing to work with the FBI. And as we mentioned earlier, 2 American airline planes were involved in those hijackings and terrorist attacks today. And there was this reaction.
Going up around the air.
So this is an extraordinary circumstance, certainly.
Is it anything you all tried to prepare for?
It's just, there's no way to prepare for something like this.
All right, in response to the attacks, the FAA has shut down all airports.
For multiple deaths.
Pentagon and a field in western Pennsylvania. Now America mourns the victims and begins the hunt for the terrorist.
The first wave of the horrifying sneak attack began at 8:45 this morning. A hijacked plane slammed into the South Tower at the World Trade Center in New York City.
Now, according to airline sources, it was American Airlines Flight 11 on a flight from Boston to Los Angeles. After it hit, flames and heavy smoke billowed through the top half of the 110-story building. Well, just 18 minutes later, a second hijacked plane zeroed in on the North Tower, and it was another direct hit.
And this one was caught on videotape. It was also shown live. A huge fireball rocketed out of the building as the jetliner blasted inside. Some of the center's 50,000 workers jumped from windows to certain death just to escape the flames and the smoke. Airline sources indicate this plane was United Flight 175, also heading from Boston to Los Angeles.
At 9:50 a.m., just about an hour after the first plane hit the Trade Center, the unthinkable happened. One World Trade Center collapsed in a blast of smoke and debris.
Just like that, one of the most visible monuments on the New York City skyline disappeared. There were reports of an explosion before the tower fell, then a strange sucking sound, and then the sound of floors collapsing one by one. At 10:30 a.m., the situation soon became even more desperate. When the second tower fell to the ground, the top of the building disappeared in an explosion of smoke and debris. Thick clouds of choking smoke billowed through the streets of New York City.
Right now, at least 5 people are confirmed dead. We know those numbers are going to grow. At least 600 people are hospitalized, 150 of those in critical condition. There are also 1,500 casualties described as the walking wounded.
This is amateur video taken from the ground as one of the towers collapses.
People began running down the street, frantically trying to get out of the way. Here it is again. We want to show it to you in slow motion. You know, this financial district is one of the busiest areas of Manhattan at around 8:30, 9 o'clock this morning. You know, there were people
The nation and missiles flying across the city. We're being told from sources in Kandahar, that's the spiritual capital of Afghanistan, 300 miles south of here, that there is no rocket activity like this south of here in Kandahar. Certainly in Kabul, very, very active at this stage. Multiple detonations. It is nighttime here. It is dark. It is difficult to get an accurate fix on exactly what we're seeing and exactly what we're hearing. Certainly the sound, what appears to be the sound of large missiles incoming and landing in the city. Certainly a big fire on the horizon of the city at the moment. And certainly anti-aircraft fire coming up from the city and rockets being launched and flying across the horizon of the city. Rockets perhaps going at the speed of several hundred miles an hour, the sort of speed that one might expect to see cruise missiles traveling across the horizon at, burning with a white glow coming from their tails.
It took me a long time to get over that. I've seen the most horrific incident in my lifetime, and there was the earthquake during the World Series where there was a lot of damage and a lot of tragedy.
Manhattan does look like a war zone as you are looking live at the smoke continuing to billow through the canyons of lower Manhattan. One can only imagine the job that lies ahead, the grim search.
Indicating that it is
system. All airports are closed until at least noontime tomorrow. That includes Philadelphia Airport, where Eyewitness News reporter Marge Palla is standing by live tonight. Marge?
Well, normally, Larry, as you know, at this hour, it would be a very, very busy place, but right now it is deserted. About the only people left here are a few stranded passengers.
The word that is too kind a description for what transpired in lower Manhattan early this morning. The location where I was as the South Tower began to collapse or implode was threatened with the largest billows of smoke and debris I have ever seen in my life. One had to take refuge inside a parked car in order to avoid what was just a raining down, something that was Sodom and Gomorrah-like in lower Manhattan. The sky turned completely black. You could not see a foot in front of you. And were it not for an open parked car, I'm not quite sure exactly what would have happened earlier this morning. But as you say, the financial market response has been as dramatic as almost anything else. As we have read on the wires, as we have heard from our colleagues, the New York Stock Exchange will be closed tomorrow, as will the other American exchanges. There will be decisions as to whether Latin American markets open on time tomorrow. Gold and oil prices surged today. Gasoline prices in St. Louis skyrocketing as traders and investors around this country worry about the financial market and economic impact of what, as we said at the top of the show, is another day of infamy in the United States. Clearly, we'll get the opinions of many around the country who participate in the financial markets to help us understand what the implications will be, not just in the immediate aftermath.
The city will be open to civilian traffic. We now are up to over 600 people that we know about that we've taken to area hospitals, 2,000 people to Liberty State Park. The morgue is operating, and we don't have a count yet, and we really don't want to hazard a guess on that until somewhat later. And just one other thing that I would like to say. A situation like this, a tragedy like this, instills lots of feelings of anger and hatred, and I'd ask the people of the city not to have those feelings right now or ever. I mean, the reality is that hatred and insanity and prejudice caused this situation probably. And we have a lot of people in the city of all different backgrounds and all diverse religions, and they're not responsible for this. Whoever is responsible for this came from outside the city of New York. I'm sure the United States government will figure out who it is, and I'm sure we'll make an example out of them, as we should. But that should be left to the law enforcement authorities like the police and the FBI, the military, and not to the people of the city. Nobody should react that way. We have no reason to expect that anyone will, but I thought it might be a good idea just to remind everyone of that. Hatred, prejudice, anger.
Dark it was.
We can see in the air reflected off clouds that could be thunder and lightning. However, there's a possibility that those reflections are missiles landing elsewhere. The flashes as they explode and reflecting off the clouds. But it's not a good indication. We certainly don't hear any detonations coming from that particular direction at this time. The anti-aircraft fire that we were seeing a little while ago is not coming up from the city. The city, apart from the detonations we were hearing a few minutes ago, appears very, very calm. The visibility here is excellent. We can see all the way across the city. It lies on a plain that's surrounded by the mountains here in Kabul. We have high mountains to the right. These mountains were used by the Mujahideen as vantage points for shelling the city several years ago during the
Granger on USA.
And we believe that will be happening at about 7:30 tonight right here on Channel.
Telling journalists and CNN that he didn't believe that Afghanistan would be attacked. He said if Afghanistan was attacked, then they would call it, the Taliban would call it an act of state-sponsored terrorism. Joey.
Could be Osama bin Laden, one of the most notorious terrorists in the world, but that is still yet to be determined. We want to continue our coverage here locally again. Of course, this attack today caused a lot of chaos in transit systems all over the area, and that
it is.
Precautions included sending all school children, city workers, and private workers in high-rises home.
Really just embracing everything that's important to you.
Very interesting to me that President Bush has been keeping an extremely low profile. I personally was not very happy to see the president go to Nebraska, be held up in a bunker, and not come back directly to D.C. Perhaps we have an explanation for that now. Perhaps this is why we have not seen more of the president. Perhaps this is also why we have had leaks earlier in the afternoon that high-ranking State Department officials were fairly certain, those are my words, not theirs, but had strong indications that it was, in fact, bin Laden who was behind this. And when you think bin Laden, you think Afghanistan, putting all the pieces together. This seems to make sense. And I'm telling you, right now, as an American, I feel much better about things on this horrible, horrific day because I...
Kabul. And Nick Robertson continues to watch there. Now let's turn to Judy Woodruff for us in Washington. Judy.
Joey, we are in the studio.
Huge, horrible, gaping hole in the west side of the Pentagon where the hijacked American airliner crashed about 9:30 this morning. The officials from the Pentagon came over and picked up a group of reporters to take them over for a briefing. And I'm sure the uppermost question on everybody's mind is going to be, what about this retaliation? Is it underway? And what's going on? And how is this particular tragedy traced directly to them?
Now, John, as we look at the damage, retrace a little bit the events of this day. The attack had just taken place in New York. The government as a whole was reacting to that suddenly, and this was close to a landing pad there at the building, one of the 5 sides, as you just pointed out, having collapsed. Suddenly, all those at work and the death toll hovering around at 100 felt the concussion.
Yes, let's go back to about 9:30. Most of the people in this building were glued to television stations and television sets watching what was unfolding with the World Trade Center in New York City. And then shortly after 9:30, there was a huge blast. There were shouts in the hallways. A little bit later, smoke then filled the hallways. People dashed out. An alarm went off at the Pentagon for people to leave. We are told that Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld himself left his office, which is on the far side of the Pentagon, ran around to this gaping hole, this side of the Pentagon on the west side, and personally tried to help some of the people to get them out there. This occurred about 9:30 this morning, and hundreds of firemen have been battling the blaze now for more than 8 hours. They have it well contained, but many areas have not been searched for casualties simply because of the flames and smoke.
John Palmer at the Pentagon, thanks. We're going to go back across town to our Washington bureau. Andrea Mitchell, we had missile trails in the sky over Kabul, Afghanistan. What have you learned about this, Andrea?
According to senior officials, they do not believe this is an American attack. This is not from the Pentagon.
Stressing we have no idea who's behind these attacks in Kabul, the government center of Afghanistan. But if this were the West, if this were the United States, would it be appropriate to retaliate so quickly?
Well, we have some information. You know, about a month ago we had information that they were planning on some big strikes, people who were affiliated or associated with bin Laden. Then just today, we've intercepted some information where some people who are associated with bin Laden basically said that they had hit 2 targets. So it looks to me like there's increasing evidence, even though it's fragmentary and even though it's not positive, that bin Laden is behind all this. And of course, I first warned the nation in 1996 on Meet the Press that we better get hold of bin Laden or he's going to kill Americans.
We're going to bring back our Nick Robertson there on the ground in, or I should say on top of a building there in Kabul. Nick, you're on. Go.
Well, certainly the fire we were watching on the horizon before, I'd made the assumption that it was an oil depot burning because we'd certainly seen flames, a dull yellow fire turn into a bright orange fire with flames leaping into the sky. I've been informed by my associates here who work with us in Kabul that it's very likely an ammunition dump that we're looking at. They believe an ammunition dump is located in that area. That, of course, would account for some of the explosions that we've been hearing here as ammunition is.
And the issue is that the way these buildings collapse, it is quite possible there are survivors, and what we're going to send to the scene is a unique blend of rescue work and emergency medicine. We're going to do everything we can to try to rescue these people and get them out alive.
So right now we're in a holding position. Right now we're waiting for those
more deaths.
Why don't you shut the door?
There are some things we should be looking at. We should.
And the countless games on Saturday. The one conference commissioner who was adamant about not playing college football games on Saturday.
Certainty, and they're going to use our virtue.
Certainly, in the past, the Northern Alliance has launched missiles at Kabul. It is not without the realms of possibility that the Northern Alliance could launch missiles at this time. The Northern Alliance...
Kittredge White watched in horror as people jumped or fell from the top floors of the burning World Trade Center.
Couldn't look away. It was like seeing what was happening to them and knowing what kind of terror they must be in, being trapped in a corner office that's burning. The whole 3 floors were on flames, and suddenly you just start seeing these tiny little black figures falling.
In shock and disoriented, some of the witnesses fled to Jersey City, still in their bathrobes, many with pets, waiting in line to reach loved ones. These 2 men were actually on the 40th floor of one of the towers when it was hit.
We were running around different floors trying to find a different escape because of all the smoke.
There is a need for 3 doctors here.
Crews set up a triage center at Liberty State Park. Officials commandeered many of the boats on the Hudson River and are using them to transport the seriously injured to Jersey City.
Responsibility for the explosions.
A lot of the triage stations that were set up in the treatment areas. I can also tell you that a police officer who had been down in that dust zone for the better part of the entire day told me that a morgue had been set up, the location of which wasn't being disclosed, but that most of the bodies, take a look at this if you can, as this vehicle goes through. That's evidence of what we've seen a lot of today. Police and emergency vehicles covered in the Mount St. Helens type dust, and also the windows blown out. An ambulance also burned all along one side, the windows blown out of it as well. The ambulance driver passing through here and telling me this ambulance was new this morning. It's really just an unbelievable scene, Brian.
All right, Ashley Banfield in Lower Manhattan. It was an unbelievable day for the traveling White House. We may never know the threat assessment as seen against this president today. This day saw him start out in Florida, then move to 2 different Air Force bases, one in Louisiana, one in the Midwest, before being en route back to Washington tonight, where we have learned he will address the nation on television. Because the White House was evacuated, the Vice President and First Lady were taken to safe places. NBC News correspondent Bob Kerr is doing his work out of FBI headquarters that has become the de facto White House briefing room this evening. Bob, good evening to you.
Brian, good evening. On the phone this time because we have moved. A small group of us now are the first to be let in back to the White House. I have just cleared security, and you know the walk. I'm walking down through the northwest gate into the driveway, looking straight at the west wing as we speak. So a small group of press now being allowed back in here to the White House. What's odd, Brian, is that tonight, a little while from now, there was supposed to be a joyous and gala barbecue on the South Lawn, a barbecue for Congress.
Says Americans must think of today's actions as acts of war, that in response we must step up security, intelligence, and hammer the
and kept out of town for a good while, first in Nebraska, first to Louisiana Air Force facility, and then to a Nebraska Air Force base, from where he will come back here to the White House. Also, for that matter, the congressional leaders, we're told, were also spirited out of town to protect them. I can tell you, Brian, we made a 7-block walk from the FBI building on 10th Street up here to the White House on 17th.
Nothing in the sky tonight.
It remains a ghost town in Washington. You could look down one of the major streets and...
Expected to speak to the United States later tonight.
Shut down.
For many people. Done a very good job of explaining how well financed.
Going to look more like Tel Aviv, I think, in London.
Now, Commissioner Timoney says that he is in constant contact with the terrorist task force as well as the FBI. He also adds that he is prepared to send manpower.
In and up.
Heavily armed officers race to surround state and federal facilities here.
No trucks, nobody. I don't want no trucks around the building. That's the order, okay?
Outside the Liberty Bell, Lieutenant Bill Schmidt deployed officers as steel barricades were brought in to seal off the landmark.
We're just redeploying some officers. Commissioner Timoney wants us to redeploy just to keep everybody calm and to make sure that we don't have any problems down here.
As federal buildings closed down, children from their daycare center were carefully taken elsewhere under the watchful eye of officers.
Close the buildings and the park down. Should be the tragedy in swinging in New York.
Tour guides broke the bad news to groups that the Liberty Bell, for now, could not be seen. Our Chief Phil Sheridan explaining it was part of the historical park's security plan.
Well, based on the events of this morning in Washington, D.C. and in New York City, we thought it was prudent to close Independence National Historical Park to help protect the visitors, our staff, and the buildings.
But for 8-year-old Brandon Jones, the sudden sight of armed officers and barricades on what he thought would be a fun historical trip was upsetting.
He's scared.
While not providing details on exactly what they're doing, FBI officials here say they are putting long-standing plans into action.
Many of the agents have been ordered to get ready. They're on standby to go wherever headquarters needs them to go, whether it's New York, Washington. Obviously, a cadre
in the Pentagon all day. He went outside briefly to make an inspection tour of the deck.
The second building has just come down. The second, everyone's being asked to get down. Come down.
Can't even look at it. Because all I can see are people. I don't see a building, I see people. People hurt. Children without mothers and fathers tonight.
I went to fire alarm company. The doorman goes to me, wow, I never seen a plane flying so low. And we looked out at it, all of a sudden, boom, it seemed like it wasn't even real. And we came running over here closer to the place, and all of a sudden we saw the other explosion. I don't know.
I was in B Tower. A Tower.
What floor were you on?
B1.
What floor?
First one.
What happened? Tell me.
When a big explosion happened, some guy came out. His skin was all off. I helped him out. This is a moment.
Now, the second plane that hit the World Trade Center in New York today, that United Airlines flight that burst into flames, exploded into flames, virtually sheared the building in half. Can we see it, please? Is particularly significant for people in Bucks County for one very specific reason. I think that's the first one, but perhaps we'll see the plane. Here we go. The pilot of that plane, not the man at the controls of the plane at the time, but the pilot of that plane was Victor Saraceni from Yardley, Pennsylvania in Bucks County. A family spokesman is now talking in front of the Saraceni house. Let's listen to what he has to say.
No, to be honest with you, I haven't even gotten that information myself.
Have you flown any flights with him?
No, I don't think I've ever actually flown with him, but I have known him since he started with United Airlines. We were both captains, so we don't generally fly together.
How is the family doing at this point?
Oh, they're in shock. they're in total shock. I don't think it's actually set in.
Have all the children and everybody been told? I know earlier
Yes.
today some did not know what had happened and did not realize the full extent of this tragedy here.
The children are with Mr. Saraceni now, and they've been told, and they've got a lot of support from their friends right now.
Fit a building to withstand an air attack like that, it's not likely that it would be economically feasible or would result in a building that is very usable.
And finally, what about the buildings that surround the site of the former Twin Towers? Are they safe following this violent collapse?
We'll have to inspect all the neighboring buildings. We'll have to see how they were damaged from debris. It's possible that the collapse of one or both of those buildings impacted another building, and therefore, yes, it's a possibility.
So not out of the woods yet?
No, absolutely not.
And how prophetic those words were. Take a look. Just within the hour, another building collapsed. This one was World Trade Center building number 7. I think we have some tape there. That was the building that was burning most of the day, and finally it too went down. Apparently, World Trade Center building number 5 is also on fire. We're told that authorities had evacuated those buildings, so we are far from out of the woods. And you know, just to put this into perspective, 2,400 Americans were killed in the attack on Pearl Harbor today. At the end of the day, sadly enough, that figure may be dwarfed by this attack.
Right, because there are about 50,000 people who work in the Twin Towers,
Absolutely.
apparently, and
Yes.
that doesn't include the 266 people who were on the plane's passengers.
Absolutely.
That's the next dangerous phase of this story, what they uncover in the next day or two.
All right, thank you very much,
Sure.
Paul. There are a wide variety of closings tonight as a result of today's attacks. Among the things closed, most major universities with night classes. We'll get back to that for you in just a moment. This morning's terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in New York prompted many school closings, including all Philadelphia public and parochial schools.
Some daycare centers closed as well, and that
Anybody and rear of the plane, and if in fact the terrorist
was pretty incredulous.
To Osama bin Laden himself. Condolences and support to the victims and to their families, and certainly that is an important message, I think, that
November.
Just as early in the nation, with the possible exception of former President Clinton, because he was in office 8 years, he would know.
Zoolander, rated PG-13. Starts Friday, September 28th everywhere.
Events. New Jersey remains.
How about you?
Former N.
Great. I know this quaint little all-you-can-eat liver joint.
Cop drama to the new series on 8.
What was I supposed to do?
For an in.
Up one that says.
Political problem, isn't it?
Election of Rumsfeld.
By Colonel Bubble.
Américaine face aux problèmes du monde. Ici, nous sommes dans le pays du monde le plus puissant. Le Pentagone, c'est l'entité militaire la plus puissante du monde. Et les Américains étaient convaincus jusqu'à ce matin que Washington n'était pas une cible, même potentielle pour les terroristes. Même chose pour Washington. Or, pour New York. Ce matin, j'ai pu me promener à vélo, parce que maintenant les rues sont bloquées. Derrière moi, vous avez la Maison-Blanche, mais cette Maison-Blanche est devenue une sorte de camp retranché. À plusieurs centaines de mètres de la Maison-Blanche, vous avez des voitures des Secret Service, vous avez le FBI, vous avez ces fameuses bandes jaunes qui barrent les rues, et...
5 passengers their bags now. Look, we'll search them later. You go to a hotel.
You're among the...
Yeah, open.
Honey, what's the setting from the internet?
Free wide and...
Was it or was not it not President Clinton's intention, to, among other things, to send a message to bin Laden and others of his ilk that the reach of...
We get in your car, drive your eye.
There was every non. Let alone.
Kingdom by.
Like this. I offered him a piece of my...
Trabajo y continúa haciendo una excelente labor.
Gracias.
Te agradecemos que hayas compartido tu experiencia con nosotros.
No, es Nueva York. Eso sí es que una cosa que tiene Nueva York, cuando cosas así pasan.
Every race.
Friends are when the retaliation starts.
Now, let me ask you this question about the hijackings themselves. Obviously, there's some mystery. We thought in America that we had conquered this that was tight and you couldn't get aboard an airplane with any kind of metal on you or anything that would be any kind of weapon. What would be your estimate as to how this hijacking was able to be executed?
It's hard to say, but it's obvious, in addition to an intelligence failure, we have a catastrophic airport security failure here with 4 hijackings in one day. I travel a lot, as many people do, and of course, I've noticed that it's often the case that the people in charge and conducting these searches are not always as attentive as they should be. It's possible that these people got on board without real weapons and used fake weapons they could get through the X-ray machines. We just don't know at this point. But it's clear there is a catastrophic security failure, which is going to have to be gotten to the bottom of.
Would it be your guess, based upon the magnitude of the attack, the precision with which it was executed, that anybody, is there anybody you can think of beside Osama bin Laden who might have been behind it?
Yes, I think at this point there's a list, it's a short list of 3 or 4 possibilities. Bin Laden is certainly suspect number 1. It's also possible some of the groups in the Middle East, the more radical Palestinian groups, could possibly have conducted such an attack.
How likely would it?
Well, you can't say. At this point, you're just asking for who could do it, and they're
Gotcha.
capable. And Iraq would be the 3rd on the list. It's clear Saddam Hussein, or a state, Iraq and Iran, would be the 4th. Would have this kind of capability. I think it's unlikely that the Iranians are behind it, but I wouldn't at this point, if I were advising the president, I don't think one would exclude any of those suspects yet.
All right. Paul Bremer, very, very useful information and analysis. Thank you very much, sir. Let me turn now to Senator Bob Graham of Florida, a Democratic senator. Senator, there's been a lot of talk on Capitol Hill, and you just heard it reflected in the...
Lord Hanay suggested, which is to go around the world and make every country be counted. Are you on the side of the civilized world, or are you on the side of those who would support what we just saw on the television set, and make every country in every part of
it's away from the terror of the Middle East? I'm not saying this came from there, but it bears many of the earmarks of that.
Because the notion of adhering to these self-imposed fiscal restraints, the so-called lockbox, really now should be put aside. The government should not only stop sequestering money, but we will need additional defense expenditures. We'll need money to rebuild, to reconstruct. And I think now a tax cut, particularly a tax cut for lower income people who would go out and be more inclined to spend it, could help prime the pump at this point in time. It would restore confidence and show that.
Within the past few minutes, we got these scenes from Afghanistan. Explosions just to the north of the capital city of Kabul, near the airport. CBS next.
Good night, everybody.
A stunning and cowardly strike on the United States. Terrorists send mighty skyscrapers crumbling to the ground. Many innocent people are dead. The president vows the killers will pay for this attack on America.
Looking at
this horrendous attack.
any other here
happened to us.
Coverage. Series of attacks today against targets in New York and in Washington, D.C. The world
of coordinated terror strikes today at this country, its people,
and their passengers as guided missiles in their attack. The most serious attack on this country since Pearl Harbor, and tonight, the dead still are being counted. An unknown number still are missing. At this hour in this war, another development, there are reports out of Kabul tonight, the capital of Afghanistan, of explosions, but the Pentagon and the CIA are flatly denying.
A target intended in or near Washington went down in southwestern Pennsylvania. Here's what's happening at this hour. As the evening goes on and night begins to fall in New York and Washington, brave rescue workers are searching desperately for victims in the rubble of the World Trade Center towers and a third building around the World Trade Center that also collapsed. 50,000 people generally work in the World Trade Center. A count of the dead still a long way off. Emergency operations are also continuing at the scene of the crisis at the Pentagon in Pennsylvania. There were well over 250 people on the 4 crashed planes. In contrast to the chaos on the ground, the skies are eerily quiet because the FAA has grounded all civilian aircraft at least until noon tomorrow. There is unprecedented security around the leadership of the U.S. government. President George W. Bush will address the nation from Washington. We're now told at 9 Eastern time this evening, and that will be roughly 2.5 hours from now. The president will address the nation. The president has put the U.S. military on high alert worldwide. President Bush vowed that the United States will find and punish whoever's behind what he described as, quote, these cowardly acts. Early speculation, underscore the word speculation, centers on Osama bin Laden. We have mobilized the full resources of CBS News to bring you clear, accurate coverage of this day that will live in infamy. CBS News correspondents and producers are deployed throughout the country and around the world.
Gray than black, indicating that the fires have diminished somewhat, but it's still an extremely dangerous situation. Just within the last hour or so, a third building, a 40-story building, also collapsed. 40 more stories of concrete, steel, and iron crashing to the ground. A makeshift morgue has been set up near the World Trade Center. New York City police still sticking to their early estimates that the casualties ultimately may number in the thousands. Nothing more precise than that. We've put together a chronology of the events as America's watched, dumbfounded, and yes, outraged and defiant. The first attack plane, a hijacked American Airlines flight out of Boston, slams into the North Tower of New York's World Trade Center at approximately 8:42 a.m. Eastern Time. The explosions and fireballs broadcast live by television helicopters, which then, horrifically, spot the second attack plane, a United Airlines flight hijacked from Boston, taking dead aim at the World Trade Center's South Tower. It's now approximately 9:03 a.m.
Hey, where the hell can I meet you? Oh, I'm across the street from the Marriott, man. A second airplane, a 727, just ran into the building.
Emergency officials estimate 20,000 or more people may have been inside the two 110-story buildings at the time of the attacks. Eyewitnesses report victims falling, and in some cases, jumping from the two buildings.
But there were people falling out of the sky.
At 9:29 a.m., President Bush in Florida addresses the nation for the first time.
Terrorism against our nation will not stand.
But in the nation's capital, just 11 minutes later, 9:40 a.m., a third hijacked plane, an American flight out of Washington Dulles, crashes into the Pentagon in a burst of flames, the plane's wreckage tearing a gaping hole into one side of the building. Federal buildings are evacuated, government leaders taken to secure hideouts. 9:59 a.m., the until now unthinkable, the South Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. An unknown number of people still trapped inside, including the rescuers, firefighters, and police who'd gone in trying to save lives. Then at 10 a.m., hundreds of miles away in western Pennsylvania, a fourth hijacked plane, a United flight out of Newark, crashes 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. 1/2 hour later, 10:28 a.m., the North Tower of the World Trade Center collapses. Rubble, debris spreading for blocks. In all, 266 people aboard 4 hijacked planes are killed. Untold others in Washington and New York missing and presumed dead. In New York, a defiant Mayor Rudolph Giuliani.
The city of New York in the United States of America is much stronger than any group of barbaric terrorists.
For the first time in U.S. history, the Federal Aviation Administration closes all domestic airports, shutting down all U.S. airspace until at least noon tomorrow. The U.S. military and American embassies worldwide placed on the highest alert. Navy aircraft carriers and destroyers deployed along the eastern seaboard. The president, now in Louisiana, speaks for a second time.
The resolve of our great nation is being tested. But make no mistake, we will show the world that we will pass this test.
The president is then taken to the secure Strategic Air Command in Nebraska, meets with his national security team via teleconference before boarding Air Force One to return to Washington. But in New York late this afternoon, a third damaged building, the 40-story World Trade Center No. 7, also crashes to the ground.
And emergency officials allow the first camera crew from NBC News inside the smoking hulks of the Twin Towers. Ground Zero, cars overturned, steel torn apart, glass shards, small fires still burning. The very picture America most feared, the image terrorists most wanted. As to who might be responsible, a senior American intelligence official tells NBC News tonight that they are now, and I'm quoting here, 90% certain that Osama bin Laden, the Saudi-born terrorist, was responsible for today's attack. This official tells NBC News, quote, "This is not just surmise, this is new information." The president plans to address the nation from Washington, D.C. tonight. Tom?
Thank you very much, NBC's David Bloom. And we're going to go now to Washington, where NBC's Campbell Brown, who covers the White House, is on duty. But across the street from the White House, the president is expected back there shortly. Campbell?
Tom, the president is on his way back to Washington tonight. We're told that Air Force One is being escorted by F-15 fighter jets on each wing. As David said, he is planning to address the nation tonight. One aide says his message...
Dan, except for a few sirens, I have never heard New York City this quiet. Graveyard quiet. Dan?
Byron Pitts in Lower Manhattan. When the first World Trade Center building was hit, rescue workers rushed to it. We're now told that some of those rescue workers died as the second World Trade Center building was hit, and eventually the two buildings collapsed. Now about today's other terrorist strike at the seat and symbol of U.S. military power, the U.S. Defense Department, the Pentagon. There were 64 people aboard American Flight 77, the jetliner hijackers used to ram into the Pentagon. CBS News' David Martin reports the deadly impact there. David?
Dan, as you can see behind me, the Pentagon is still smoldering from that direct hit it suffered this morning, but it's finally cooled down enough so that rescue workers can begin the task of recovering the dead and wounded. One early count put the number of dead at 20, but no one expects it to stop there. The first attack ever on the Pentagon occurred at 9:38 a.m. Eastern Time.
Clipped this ball over here, hit another ball and slammed right into the building. Huge explosion, and then utter pandemonium, as you might imagine. I mean, everybody was screaming, "Oh my God."
A hijacked American Airlines jet, which had just taken off from Dulles Airport, flew right up the main highway leading north into Washington and straight into the citadel of American military power.
There was no doubt about it. It was American Airlines slammed right into the building, and there was no doubt about it. Whoever was piloting that plane was aiming for the Pentagon.
Fearful that, like the World Trade Center, a second airliner was on its way, most of the building's 23,000 workers fled.
Plane's coming. Come on. Let's go. Let's go. Come on. We're not playing around here. Let's go.
F-16 fighters circled overhead looking for a second attack, but the damage had already been done. The plane had drilled a hole about a third of the way through the world's largest office building. The wounded were rushed to nearby hospitals as the fire spread and an entire section of the building collapsed, trapping many, many more inside.
Arlington search and rescue personnel are just now, and it's about almost 2 o'clock, just now gaining access to portions of the building where the plane hit because the fires were too intense.
One ray of hope. The Pentagon is undergoing a major renovation, and some of the offices in the path of the plane were vacant.
We're trying to find out who made it out okay and account for the people that may not have made it out.
When the plane hit, Defense Secretary Rumsfeld dashed from his office on the other side of the building.
And proceeded down towards the impact point in the building. It actually went outside the building and was helpful in getting several people that were injured onto stretchers, and then came back into the building and was in the National Military Command Center.
With smoke hanging in the air of the command center, Rumsfeld ordered aircraft carriers, amphibious ships, cruisers, and destroyers to New York and Washington, where they can serve as floating hospitals, help with the cleanup, and provide air defense against the possibility of more attacks. Rescue efforts are a long way from over, but the FBI is already combing the debris for clues to who was behind this. The Pentagon has put all its bases on the highest state of alert, and the State Department has done the same thing with American embassies around the world. The early suspicion is that Osama bin Laden was behind this, and U.S. officials say eventually there will be military retaliation. Dan?
David Martin reporting live from the Pentagon. President Bush is just reported to have landed at Andrews Air Force Base just outside of Washington. He is said to be going to the White House itself. From there, he will address the American people tonight. You will see and hear it, of course, live on CBS News. As regards the explosions in Kabul, Afghanistan, a senior Pentagon official now says, and I quote him, "That is not a U.S. strike." Repeat, not a U.S. strike. This despite reports from the scene by at least one reporter on the scene who said that it was a missile strike. A senior Pentagon official says that it's simply not true. It wasn't a U.S. strike. Now, to punish those behind today's attacks, the United States and its people must first determine who they are. We are a country that believes in facts and the pursuit of facts. The facts are few about who's responsible for this. There has been much speculation, italicize, underscore the word speculation about that today, with Osama bin Laden, the renegade Saudi millionaire, frequently mentioned. No one knows who did this. CBS's Jim Stewart in Washington is following the investigation, checking his sources, and has this live report. Jim?
Dan, apparently we have
not been told not to talk about it, but there was some question. The president does traditionally come from Andrews Air Force Base down, and one assumes, given the extraordinary security that's surrounded the president today and how the Secret Service has moved him first from Florida and then out to Nebraska and now to Louisiana, first of all, and then to Nebraska and back to Washington, president all over the country. Here's the Secretary of Defense, Don Rumsfeld, who's been in the Pentagon all day. And we're having difficulty hearing him, and one should not be surprised if there isn't some kind of, if there's some kind of hookup that didn't work today. Very, very rarely today have we had a problem. So we'll have our reporter on the scene listen to this, and the moment that we can hear him, we will go back to him. But in the meantime, Claire Shipman is just outside the White House across Lafayette Square. Claire, I want to check in quickly with you, if I may, to know that if we know anything about the president's plans for this evening that we, in some respects, haven't had on the air today, or go beyond what Ann's reporting is.
Well, what we do know is that we're told by sources who've been with the president today that he is extremely upset, of course, about what has happened, but agitated and angry. Somebody told us that the language he will use tonight will be retaliatory. He will express his impatience. In other words, he will say there won't be a long time spent thinking about how to act once
Claire,
the U.S. is confident.
I apologize. I wouldn't interrupt you if
Sure.
we couldn't go back to Mr. Rumsfeld, Secretary of Defense. Well, the best laid plans. First of all, here we are.
Kind enough to come down and has been with us. We've very recently had a discussion with the President of the United States. Chairman Hugh Shelton has just landed from Europe. Secretary of the Army, Tom White, who has a responsibility for incidents like this, as executive agent for the Department of Defense, is also joining me. It's an indication that the United States government is functioning in the face of this terrible act against our country. I should add that the briefing here is taking place in the Pentagon. The Pentagon's functioning. It'll be in business tomorrow. I know the interest in casualty figures, and all I can say is it's not possible to have solid casualty figures at this time, and the various components are doing roster checks, and we'll have information at some point in the future, and as quickly as it's possible to have it, it will certainly be made available to each of you. I'll be happy to take a few questions after asking First General Shelton if he would like to say anything, and then we will allow the others to make a remark or two.
General Shelton,
Thank you,
outgoing
Secretary.
Chairman of the Joint Chiefs.
Ladies and gentlemen, as the Secretary just said, today we have watched the tragedy of an outrageous act of barbaric terrorism carried out by fanatics against both civilians and military people. Acts that have killed and maimed many innocent and decent citizens of our country. I extend my condolences to the entire Department of Defense families, military and civilian, and to the families of all those throughout our nation who lost loved ones. I think this is indeed a reminder of the tragedy and the tragic dangers that we face day in and day out, both here at home as well as abroad. I would tell you up front, I have no intentions of discussing today what comes next, but make no mistake about it, your armed forces are ready. Mr. Chairman.
Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Carl Levin.
Our intense focus on recovery and helping the injured and the families of those who were killed is matched only by our determination to prevent,
by the very question of whether indeed they will even be played,
and matched only by our unity to track down, root out,
mostly pursue terrorists.
Moves any stain.
Well, that's what the investigators.
They are the common enemy of the civilized world. Our institutions are strong, and our unity is palpable.
Senator John Warner.
Thank you. As a past chairman preceding Carl Levin, I can assure you that the Congress stands behind our president, and the president speaks with one voice for this entire nation. This,
and I hope we don't shut down
in America's history. And yet I think it can be its finest hour as our president and those with him, most notably our Secretary of Defense, our chairman, and the men and women of the armed forces all over this world stand ready not only to defend this nation and our allies against further attack, but to take such actions as are directed in the future in retaliation for this terrorist act. A series of terrorist acts unprecedented in world history. We call upon the entire world to step up and help, because terrorism is a common enemy to all, and we're in this together. The United States has borne the brunt, but who can be next? Step forward and let us hold accountable and punish those that have perpetrated this attack. Again, I commend the Secretary, the Chairman, and how proud we are. We spoke with our President here moments ago. He's got a firm grip on this situation, and the Secretary and the General have a firm grip on our armed forces and in communication of the world over.
The Secretary of Defense, Carl Levin, Senator, Democratic Senator Carl. They're going to take questions. Let's stay here with this and see if anything is revealed.
Mr. Secretary, did you have any inkling at all, in any way, that something of this nature and something of this scope might be planned?
Charlie, we don't discuss intelligence matters.
I see. And how would you respond if you find out who did this?
Obviously, the President of the United States has spoken on that subject, and those are issues that he will address in good time.
Mr.
Yes.
Secretary, we are getting reports from CNN and others that there are bombs exploding in Kabul, Afghanistan. Are we at the moment striking back, and if so, is the target Osama bin Laden and his organization?
I've seen those reports. They, in no way is the United States government connected to those explosions.
What about Osama bin Laden? Do you suspect him as the prime suspect in this?
It's not the time for discussions like that.
Mr. Secretary, you said you could not be specific about casualties. Can you give us some characterization of whether it's dozens or hundreds in the building?
Well, we know there were large number, many dozens in the aircraft that flew at full power, steering directly into between I think the first and second floor of the opposite the helipad. You've seen it. There cannot be any survivors. It just would be beyond comprehension. There are a number of people that they've not identified by name, but identified as being dead, and there are a number of casualties. But the FBI has secured the site, and the information takes time to come. People have been lifted out and taken away in ambulances, and the numbers will be calculated, and it will not be a few.
Mr. Secretary, could you tell us what you saw? Mr. Secretary, do you consider what happened today, both in New York and here, an act of war?
There is no question but that the attack against the United States of America today was a vicious, well-coordinated, a massive attack against the United States of America. What words the lawyers will use to characterize it is for them.
The Secretary of Defense, Don Rumsfeld, being asked all the obvious questions, and let's just quickly review them before we move. Did they have any inkling of this in advance? The answer is they don't discuss this. Every single piece of evidence we have seen all day says the United States in no way had any inkling of what was going to happen, and if they did, boy, somebody missed something somewhere. Secretary, reaffirming what we reported to you already, the U.S. has no, or saying again what we've said already, that the U.S. has no involvement in Afghanistan. The violence occurring in Kabul tonight. This is not a time to discuss whether or not the United States suspects Osama bin Laden, but he's been at the top of the list of American suspects for international acts of international terrorism for so long now, it's impossible not to imagine he wouldn't be at the top. Casualties in the building, he says there are many, and then he goes on to make the point that we sometimes forget in covering New York and the Pentagon today, and that is the people who died on the aircraft. 266 people died on 3 aircraft today, 4 aircraft today. The 2 that crashed into the trade towers, the 1 that crashed into the Pentagon, and the 1 that crashed in Pennsylvania today, whether or not it was on a mission or not. Was this an act of war? Secretary of Defense and everybody else in the government today, you can expect to be very careful about using the phrase an act of war, because it imposes on the United States certain requirements to respond in certain ways if they find themselves involved in a war, especially with another country. We believe this is now the President coming from Andrews Air Force Base to the White House, but it was Senator John Warner, one of the most senior politicians involved with the military for many, many years now, and a man with a real sense of history and knowledge of history, surely, who describes this as the most tragic hour in America's history. I think there will be people, not least of whom are historians throughout the country, will argue with the senator about that today, given the attack on Pearl Harbor, given the invasion of Normandy, and heavens knows, given the first and most tragic days of the Civil War in 1861, who will argue with that characterization. But it does give you some real sense at the moment of how intense the feeling is, not only in the political establishment in the country as a whole as well, and all sorts of other countries. I'm getting messages from countries all day today, people deeply, profoundly shaken by the experience that the United States has had today. I want to go to Washington now because Claire Shipman is there right opposite the White House. We'll come back to Charlie Gibson and casualties in just a moment, but as we think, Claire, that the President may indeed be arriving, are those helicopters, Air Force or Marine One as it's called, the President's helicopter coming from Andrews Air Force Base?
Yes, that's right, Peter, and in fact we're told the only reason that his security team felt comfortable letting him chopper back to the White House was because there is substantial air cover in the area keeping him protected. But it has been a long day for him, as you noted, and he has, we're told from people who were with him, wanted to get back to the White House all day, but again was listening very closely to his security team, who wanted to be absolutely certain that that was going to be all right. We were talking earlier, the President is very eager to make plain tonight that his mood is retaliatory, to express impatience. We got a little bit of a hint of that from a statement from Ari Fleischer, his press secretary today, who said not so long ago, we will find these people and they will suffer the consequences of taking on this nation. I wouldn't be surprised to hear something like that from the President tonight. Equally eager to get back, Peter, just as the President is back, congressional leaders, they're planning to make a public statement tonight at 7:30 p.m. Again, everybody wanting to show this is business as usual in Washington, certainly not usual in the way we would ever define it, but they want to show a government that is up and functioning because they think that the PR element here, in terms of sending a message around the world, is every bit as important as security measures.
As we wait, I'm going to bring in the voice of Charlie Gibson at the moment because I do not want to go away from this scene on what I assume is the south lawn of the White House. We'll just stay with this and watch the President come out. But Charlie, you've been trying to get some kind of handle on casualties throughout the day. Have had any success?
Well, no, Peter. People want a number, and as if it were some way to quantify these most horrific of acts, and properly no one has been willing to speculate on what that number may be. Obviously, any low number would have to be ratcheted up at some point. and to give upper-end estimates are probably too horrible to imagine. As the mayor of New York, Rudolph Giuliani, said, when we get the final number, it will be more than we can bear. The concern, obviously, is that there were emergency workers inside the World Trade Centers when they collapsed, when the Twin Towers came down, and the evacuations had not been completed. And as the Secretary of Defense said a moment ago, when we get the totals from the Pentagon, it will be a lot more than a few. We do have some estimates on injured, but again, these are highly unreliable. The mayor, again, saying at least 2,100 injured in New York, 1,500 taken to Liberty State Park across the Hudson River in New Jersey, 600 taken to hospitals, and the most chilling, one of the most chilling quotes that we've heard today, St. Vincent's Hospital here in New York had more than 200 injured. One doctor, Stephen Stern, saying there hundreds of people burned head to toe, and we know many burn victims have been evacuated, some as far away as being taken to Canada, some being flown to Vanderbilt Hospital in Nashville. The military apparently flying those burn victims out.
Thanks, Tony. There he is, the president, coming back from a trip that has taken him first to Florida today to talk about education, when ironically the political establishment in Washington wanted to talk about federal budget and keeping the country out of recession. And then this happened just as the president was visiting a group of people. He learned about it, spoke to the people, then moved on to Louisiana and then out to Nebraska, where he went into a bunker totally reminiscent of the situation which the president might have found himself in, and which the country prepared for during the Cold War, when the issue was nuclear exchange between the United States and the Soviet Union. And now, after something of a sharp debate, we gather, between the president's political staff and between the Secret Service, the president is coming home to the White House. There's nothing that this president, this new and young president, could ever have imagined was going to occur on his watch, which would test his leadership qualities so.
Barbara Olson, the wife of the U.S. Solicitor General, who by telephone from the hijacked plane that eventually hit the Pentagon described some of the hijackers as having knife-like equipment. What's that all about?
Well, Dan, I think it could be critical in understanding how the security was breached. Remember, at airport checkpoints, there are two main pieces of equipment. There are X-ray machines. They are designed exclusively to look for the shape of a gun. That's the weapon that aviation experts fear. Also, there are magnetometers, metal detectors, and they are designed to pick up any metal, also a gun. But imagine for a moment, we heard apparently that Barbara Olson radioed they were using knife-like devices. What if these were made of some other hard material, some kind of plastic? What if they were disguised as fountain pens or secured somewhere on the body of the person or within a briefcase? They would not automatically set off the kind of alarm bells that a gun would set off. And in order for these attacks to have been promulgated simultaneously, it might go a long way to explain how they were able to breach the system 3 different places at once. Dan?
Bob Orr in Washington. Now, you're watching continuing CBS News coverage of the attack on America. Back now with our special CBS Evening News live coverage of the attack on America from CBS News World Headquarters in New York. It began just before...
Hi, I'm Jules Asner in the wardrobe area of the Hollywood Entertainment Museum, and welcome to E's Everything Emmy Sex and the City special. The 4 candid women on Sex and the City usually just like to talk about men, sex, and shoes, but the actresses who play these characters have a little bit more on their minds these days. Their show has 10 Emmy nominations, including Outstanding Comedy Series, a Best Actress, and Supporting Actress. Coming up in the next half hour, we'll find out what it's like to be singled out as one of the best, and just as important, what are they going to wear on the big night?
We spent our childhoods playing games. Were they all just primers for the games we played as adults?
The 4 30-something women on HBO's series Sex and the City are always looking for the right man. But lately, the actresses on the show have turned their focus to the right woman, a golden statue called Emmy.
We got 10 nominations, a lot of the technical nominations, which I think are very hard to get because it's the stuff that's so seamless and invisible, but it's the stuff that I think makes our show good.
Sarah Jessica Parker can pat herself on the back. She produces Sex and the City, which is nominated for Best Comedy Series, and she has a Best Actress nod for her role as Carrie.
Having spent all those years not being part of this, it makes me uncomfortable to anticipate anything good, because there's a lot of freaking good television.
Single and fabulous question mark? There was no question mark implied. I would never have agreed to be in an article. Single and fabulous question mark.
After 4 seasons, the series about 4 single women in New York continues to break ground and influence TV viewers. And often the characters' outfits get as much attention as the writing. That's why the costume designers are also Emmy nominated. So with Emmy night soon approaching, Parker and her co-star Kim Cattrall, who is nominated for Best Supporting Actress, have a lot to live up to. The pressure's on to choose the right gown.
I didn't want to have something designed specifically for me, but I have some ideas, more along the romantic vein, I think, this time, and also the comfort vein, because now being involved with Sex and the City, I've been to enough award ceremonies for the show that I know that it's going to be a long evening no matter where we go or whatever happens. I'm going to find something that's elegant and I can wear for longer than 10 or 15 minutes on a take.
In the past, I have, been more cavalier, not just about the dress, but, trying to get good everything else, the shoes and the purse. This year, I've already called somebody to help me find a dress.
Sarah Jessica Parker's character, Carrie Bradshaw, and her friends are based on the book Sex and the City. On the show, Sarah plays a successful newspaper columnist. In reality, she's just as successful, but that's where the similarities end.
One should wake up every morning to this kind of news.
Sarah Jessica Parker is referring to her Emmy nomination for her role in HBO's hit series, Sex and the City.
I've been working for 25 years as an actress, so to be able to have opportunities now at this late stage is really just nice.
The 36-year-old has worked consistently since she was a child, but it's her role as Carrie in Sex and the City that has made her a pop culture icon. The series follows the stories of 4 single women searching for love in the big city.
We are single and fabulous. Absolutely. But I had a sneaking suspicion they didn't quite believe it. I suspect there's just not been anything like it on television, It's very provocative, very compelling, intriguing characters, and it's shot on location in New York City.
And Sarah is no stranger to Manhattan. The Ohio-born actress started her career on the New York stage, but it was a Broadway role in the hit musical Annie at the age of 13 that really got her noticed. TV roles soon followed, and the girl with the crooked grin matured from awkward kid to sexy ingenue. By the age of 26, Sarah was stealing scenes from LA Story co-star Steve Martin and planting the seeds for her future in comedy.
So go away with me.
I can't. Don't you see? I would just be using you to get even with her for going away with him.
I don't mind.
Let's go.
Great.
By 1992, Sarah moved into leading film roles, starring opposite Nick Cage in Honeymoon in Vegas.
This isn't good, Jack.
Order something else.
I'm talking about us.
Cage and Parker dated briefly before she met actor Matthew Broderick in 1991. Sarah and Matthew became an item the following year and married in 1997. Broderick is a successful actor in his own right, so we couldn't help wondering if he'd appear with Sarah on her show.
I think that every year we kind of hope and we fantasize about the idea of him doing it. It just hasn't been the right thing yet. He has this idea that he wants to play a janitor on the show, and he's pretty much resolved about that, and there's not a lot we can do. So until we write the right janitor part, it seems that he won't be doing the show for a while.
Sarah worked continuously throughout the 90s, moving easily from stage to screen. But there is one thing that she will absolutely not do.
Me choosing not to do nudity has not hurt my career, as far as I'm aware. It's just something I've never felt comfortable with, and at this late stage in life, I'm certainly not going to start now.
Sarah has racked up numerous awards for her role on Sex and the City, including 2 Golden Globes.
It's surreal. It's fantastic. I don't even recall winning a spelling bee.
This year marks Sarah's 3rd Emmy nomination for Sex and the City.
I'm very proud to work in television, and I love...
So this is what big kids do. Have their friends over and eat Easy Mac? Yeah.
Did Mr. Easy Mac impress you with his ability to microwave noodles and water and mix in cheese?
Speaking of friends, don't you have an imaginary one you can play with?
Not if you're sitting on her.
It's so tasty. I think I'll have another bowl.
Make one for me too, please.
Kraft Easy Mac for the cheesiest anytime.
To remove more plaque than the leading toothbrush, take action with the Oral-B Cross Action. Its bristles crisscross to lift out and sweep away more harmful plaque. For the cleanest, healthy teeth, take action with the Oral-B Cross Action.
Want more from a sport utility? Then check out the all-wheel drive Subaru Outback. More ground clearance than a Ford Explorer Sport. More cargo space than a Jeep Cherokee. More miles per gallon than any leading midsize SUV. Add to this a smooth car-like ride and you have the sport utility with more of what you're looking for. Test drive the all-wheel drive Outback, the world's first sport utility wagon.
Having just one way to express yourself can be frustrating. That's why Cingular Wireless offers a range of airtime options. Choose two and create your own plan. Sign up now and get a deal on a cool Nokia. Cingular Wireless. What do you have to say?
Starting to think twice about how you spend that dollar?
Well, that's what the new Mickey D's Dollar Menu was designed for. It's a whole menu full of items for just $1 each. There's a McChicken sandwich for $1, a double cheeseburger for $1, a McRib Jr. for $1, 2 apple pies for $1.
Get the picture?
Hey, with the Mickey D's Dollar Menu, the choice is yours. Right here, every day at McDonald's. We love to see you smile.
One of the most cherished freedoms is the freedom of movement, the ability to move freely and safely. But today that freedom was attacked. But we will restore that freedom throughout the national transportation system as soon as possible.
We're looking at a picture also on Capitol Hill where the Senate and House leadership is preparing to speak, flanked by hundreds of members of the U.S. Congress. Here's the Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert.
The hearts and souls and feelings of the victims and the families that were a part of this great tragedy that happened in this country today. Our prayers and thoughts and words of consolation goes out to all those who have suffered. But one thing that happens here in this place is when American suffers and when people perpetrate acts against this country, we as a Congress and as a government stand united, and we stand together. Senators and House members, Democrats and Republicans will stand shoulder to shoulder to fight this evil that's been perpetrated on this nation. We will stand together to make sure that those who have brought forth this evil deed will pay the price. We're not sure who this is yet. But we have our suspicions. And when that is justified and when those suspicions are justified, we will act. We will stand with the president, we will stand with this government, and we will stand as Americans together through this time. Thank you. Today's despicable acts were an assault on our people and on our freedom. As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened
by these horrific and cowardly acts. Congress will convene tomorrow. And we will speak with one voice to condemn these attacks, to comfort the victims and their families, to commit our full support to the effort to bring those responsible to justice. We, Republicans and Democrats, House and Senate, stand strongly united behind the President and will work together to ensure that the full resources of the government are brought to bear in these efforts. Our heartfelt thoughts and our fervent prayers are with the injured and the families of those who have been lost. We know as a nation, as we said, our thoughts and prayers are with those families and those injured and those who are the casualties of today's attack. We also remember those thousands of people who are rescue workers. We ask now that we all bow our heads in a moment of silence and remembrance. Thank you.
A pointed display of bipartisan unity at this critical moment in U.S. history. It seemed like a spontaneous singing of God Bless America by scores of members of the U.S. House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, seriously trying to send a message of unity during this difficult moment. Let's go back to Paula Zahn in New York, where she's got more details on this tragic day in Manhattan. Paula?
Thanks so much, Wolf. I think all day long you have seen the images replayed of exactly what happened here in New York City. The city, a victim of multiple attacks by hijacked commercial airlines. Joining me right now is Matt Cornelius, who was in the unfortunate position of being mid-level in Tower 1, the North Tower of the World Trade Center. Matt, thanks for joining us tonight. What happened? Where were you?
Well, I just arrived at work, probably about 8:40 a.m. I put my lunch away, and I was getting ready to start the day, when all of a sudden we heard this tremendous crash. It was a really loud sound, followed by a sharp jolt in the building, and then the floor kind of seemed to wave.
We are looking at this incredibly dramatic shot of the impact of the American Airlines hitting the North Tower. You were not aware at all of what could have caused it.
We had no idea. Obviously, we knew something had struck the building. Somebody screamed out, an airplane's hit the building. But I think that was just a guess. And when I thought about that, I thought probably a private plane, because you often see them flying around the World Trade Center. No one could have ever thought that it was a commercial jet plane of that size.
And your immediate instinct, I suppose, was to get out of the building.
Yeah.
Describe the evacuation.
Well, it wasn't, because people hadn't really arrived at work yet, it wasn't very organized. We basically decided...
Now that actually represents the second attack that happened 18 minutes after your building was struck.
Right. So when we got struck, everyone basically started running for the stairways, and we went in immediately to the stairways and started our way down.
Were people pushing and shoving, or was it an orderly exit from the building?
People were confused at first, but once we were in the stairway, people were very orderly.
How long did it take you to get out of the building?
About 45 minutes. Some people were upset. They had gone through the bomb in '93.
How could it take so long to get out of the building? You had 65 flights of stairs. You're a young man, but one would think you could get out of there quicker.
We moved very quickly, probably 15 minutes to the 40th floor. And then after that, we got held up. There were firefighters coming up the stairs, police officers, and I believe FBI agents. So they were coming up, and there were people. There was a man in a wheelchair who they were trying to assist, so we kind of had a hold for him. But people remained calm throughout this and kept saying, you know, we're going to take it one stair at a time. Everybody's going to get out. I think we weren't aware of the situation. We thought it was an isolated event. I think had we known what was going on, it would have been a different story. But
these pictures obviously show the unspeakable horror and tragedy, the fallout from which we're only just beginning to grasp. Once you got out of the building, at what point did you become aware of what had truly happened?
Well, I would say the minute as we came out of the building, actually exited the complex, the police officers were screaming, "Don't look up, don't look back, just go." And of course looked back, and I saw that the second tower was indeed on fire, and that's when it hit me that this was something major. I mean, this was a real catastrophic event. And actually, when we came out of the stairs, there was a lot of devastation in the lobby, and actually the center of the complex, the plaza area, there was a lot of debris and some bodies. I mean, it was truly awful.
We have some shots now that we'd like to show you of what some people have described almost as a nuclear winter when they talked about the amount of soot coming down on those of you who were fleeing these buildings. Now that you've been able to absorb what happened, what's going through your head tonight? You must feel like a very lucky man.
I feel very lucky. I'm so thankful to be alive. My heart goes out to those who don't know about their loved ones or have lost loved ones, and it's still very surreal. I mean, I look down behind us and can't believe that my office building that I go to every day is gone.
Matt, before you go any further, we were just looking at shots of the countless number of New York firefighters that were on the scene. We are just getting information from a union official of some of the 400 firefighters that initially went into that area. 200 may have perished. Matt, we appreciate your sharing your thoughts with us tonight on this incredibly tragic day of our American history. Let's go back to Wolf Blitzer. Once again, Wolf, New York City officials are not confirming, nor is the Pentagon, exactly how many people were injured here or how many people died. I know Governor Pataki of New York was saying earlier this evening it will be many, many days before we have any of those numbers.
Those numbers are being collected, but I'm sure it's way too early, as you point out, Paula, to have even a rough guess how high that number will eventually go. Just to recap once again, President Bush preparing to address the nation in less than an hour or so, around 8:30 p.m. Eastern, an Oval Office address for President Bush from the White House. CNN senior White House correspondent John King is back on the North Lawn of the White House. John, you're back in the briefing room now. John, you were listening to that briefing when we went to the Capitol Hill congressional leadership statements that were being made. Was there any hard news that came out of that briefing?
Indeed, there was, Wolf. Some details on the emergency responses taking place. The Department of Health and Human Services, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, other agencies taking steps to provide medical and other disaster relief personnel, but also from the Treasury Secretary, Norman Mineta, a glimpse of what will be the near future, at least, for Americans now traveling around the country. Mr. Mineta saying as a result of this, first and foremost, that he will make the decision tomorrow if and when U.S. commercial air traffic can resume, all planes grounded at least through noon, he said, and when Americans do go to an airport or a train station in the future, they are likely to see a much higher level of security.
To increase traveler security. Travelers will indeed see increased security measures at our airports, train stations, and other key sites. There will be higher levels of surveillance, more stringent searches. Airport curbside luggage check-in will no longer be allowed. There will be more security officers and random identification checks. Travelers may experience some inconveniences, but we ask for your patience.
Now the President is in the Oval Office with his national security team preparing for that address to the American people. About 50 minutes away from now, that address from the Oval Office. 4 members of the President's cabinet briefing here. They refuse to take any questions. White House saying that these cabinet agencies want to gather more information. Attorney General John Ashcroft vowing, though, that the perpetrators of these terrorist attacks, he said, would be discovered and punished. And again, much of the information dealing with the relief effort underway over at the Pentagon and up in New York City. The Secretary of Health and Human Services, Tommy Thompson, urging Americans, no matter where they live, to donate blood. He said that is one urgent priority right now. Wolf.
Okay, John King, we'll be back to you. But meanwhile, I want to bring in the former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, who joins us here in our Washington Bureau. Secretary Albright, do you have a sense, you studied this situation, 4 years at the United Nations, 4 years at the State Department, who was responsible for this attack?
I think it's impossible to tell at this time, Wolf, and it's very important to get all the facts straight. But what is essential is that the countries of the world who believe in democracy and human rights stand together. And the statements that have come out, I think, from other world leaders are very important. We all have to stand together. I ache for America tonight, but I know that we will rise to the challenge because we have the best system in the world.
Is there, given the earmarkings of this highly sophisticated, very coordinated attack, that some sort of state sponsorship was behind it?
I think it's tempting to speculate, Wolf, but I think that it's probably wrong at this time to make statements that point the finger. We need to look at the facts very carefully and then respond at a time and place of our choosing. We have the best military in the world. I have the greatest confidence in our military, and I support President Bush. We are all waiting to hear what he has to say. I think the unity of this country is now essential.
But even at a time of unity, we've heard from many members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans today, members of Congress lamenting what they say was an enormous intelligence and security failure. Intelligence in the sense that the U.S. apparently had no advance indication that this was about to happen, and a security failure that 4 planes could be hijacked simultaneously.
I think we will have a lot of time for investigation and finger pointing. I think today we need to offer our condolences to the families of the victims and the bravery of those who have rescued people, and remember that this country is a country of laws, and those who oppose us are only countries that do not believe in a system of laws and democracy and the individual freedom.
You just heard the Transportation Secretary, Norm Mineta, say that travel in the United States is not going to be as relatively easy as it's been. There's going to be much tighter restrictions for Americans. They will have to endure what many Europeans have been enduring now for several years, given the terrorist operations unfolding there in other parts of the world. It's going to cause a reaction, as you well can understand, from the American public.
I think that's the least of our problems. I know when I fly, I actually welcome it when I'm asked questions, and I think it is up to all of us to cooperate. But America can't be shut down. We have to remember that we thrive as an open society, and I think we have to take all the precautions and to try to find the balance between the freedom for which we are noted and the security which we need.
Once the United States learns conclusively who was responsible for this coordinated attack, what should the response be militarily and diplomatically, politically?
Well, I think militarily I will leave that to the defense people. I do know that we have the means to respond in whatever way we want to. We do have the best and strongest military. Diplomatically, I think it is essential to be in touch with our friends and allies, to seek their unified support. Terrorists know no boundaries, they know no limits, and this has been brought home to America this time, but other countries are being threatened, and we need to all stand together. Terrorism can only be dealt with internationally.
You were the Secretary of State when the U.S. embassies in East Africa were bombed. Many Americans were killed, many other nationals were killed as well. The U.S., while you were Secretary of State, did bomb some bases in Afghanistan believed to have been associated with Osama bin Laden. A Sudanese factory was bombed. Clearly, if Osama bin Laden was responsible for this current attack, which has been widely speculated, of course. The U.S. retaliatory strike at that time didn't appear to slow him down at all.
Well, there's no way to prove that, and the truth is that my worst day as Secretary of State was when those embassies were bombed and when I brought the bodies home and met with the Kenyans and Tanzanians who had been injured. The United States has to respond. We have to respond on the basis of the facts we have, not on the basis of speculation, and I think that the important part is for us to all stand together and be supportive of President Bush.
We're going to be showing some pictures, Madam Secretary, of some U.S. warships. Recently, we're in Norfolk, moving out into the Atlantic Ocean, up the Atlantic coast to get out of port. We're taking a look at some destroyers and some frigates now. These are pictures of U.S. Navy vessels leaving the largest U.S. naval facility in Virginia, in Norfolk, clearly perhaps sending some sort of signal, some sort of sign to others who may be out there. What is that message?
That America is strong and cannot be shut down, that we have the means to bring about some kind of a response to this, and that we have the strongest military in the world, and that we're proud of our military.
General Colin Powell, your successor at the State Department, returning tonight from a visit to South America from Lima, Peru. What should he be doing right now? What do we assume he is doing to generate international diplomatic support for the United States position and for perhaps some retaliatory U.S. response?
I can understand that he must be very frustrated not to be in Washington, because I was not in Washington when the embassy bombings happened. I was in Rome, and I came back right away, and what I'm sure he is doing is being in touch with his counterparts and mustering the kind of international support that is necessary, and I'm sure will be forthcoming from our friends and allies, because we're in all of this together.
Madam Secretary, it was good for you to join us on this horrible day in American history. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wolf.
Back to you in New York, Paula.
Thanks so much, Wolf. We're going to try to give you a better perspective of the state of paralysis here in New York City tonight. Once again, we cannot confirm the number of injured, the number of killed here today, but we have just gotten confirmation from a union representing New York City firefighters that as many as half of the 400 firefighters that were initially sent to the World Trade Center area are presumably dead tonight. We have been told that victims have been transferred to some 70 area hospitals. There are pleas for donations of blood from New York City residents. I, in fact, tried to donate blood today, and there was as much as a 5-hour line of volunteers all trying to heed this plea. Right now, I'm going to check in with Greg Clarkin, who joins us from St. Vincent's Hospital, where more than several hundred of the injured were taken. Greg, what can you tell us tonight?
Yeah, we're about a block away from St. Vincent's Hospital in Lower Manhattan. This is one of the locations that has been set up since for a triage unit, as a triage unit since early this morning. Really an incredible scene. Hospital. What you see is dozens and dozens of hospital workers outfitted in their scrubs, just basically awaiting victims to treat. At this point, what we're hearing is that the pace has slowed down considerably. We've just been briefed by the president of St. Vincent's, David Campbell. He says at the moment there are 319 patients at St. Vincent's. Of that, 50 to 55 are listed in critical condition. He also confirmed that there were 3 deaths at St. Vincent's. Also, New York Governor George Pataki stopped by. He spoke to the doctors as well as the victims. One of the doctors overseeing the operations in the emergency room today described some of the injuries that they saw early on. He said at the very early stages of this tragedy, what they saw were severe burns, a lot of trauma, and a lot of heart-related problems. Now, he said the heart attacks and cardiac arrest could be from pre-existing heart conditions or possibly induced by the trauma that the people saw at the World Trade Center today. Now, tomorrow they expect to get a different type of injury. Right now, the Trade Center is considered a hot zone. There are no rescue efforts underway, the doctor said, but tomorrow they expect that hot zone to be lifted, rescue workers to go back in. What they will be expecting then is what they call crush injuries, and that could be broken bones, anything that happens by people being buried underneath rubble, kidney failure, dehydration, and the like. They're expecting to see a whole different variety of injuries tomorrow. So again, from St. Vincent's, which has been a triage unit throughout the day, the scene has slowed down a little bit, but they do expect it to pick back up when the rescue efforts resume. Paula, back to you.
All right, thanks so much, Greg. And during your report, I just got more information that the New York Police Department now confirms that there are 78 police officers on its force that are missing tonight. Right now I'm going to turn to Richard Holbrooke, former UN ambassador, to provide some sort of perspective for us this evening. Mr. Holbrooke, we have heard General Shelton describe today's vicious acts as outrageous acts of barbaric terrorism. Senator Orrin Hatch called it an act of war. Senator John Warner calling it the most tragic hour of American history. What is your perspective on this evening?
Well, first of all, Paula, as a New Yorker and somebody who had the honor of being guarded by the New York City Police and working with the firemen, I am stricken beyond words at the information you've just mentioned about the death toll among the police and the firemen. I used to work in that building and was there next door during the previous attack, and as in the 1993 case, New York City citizens have responded in this extraordinary way. Your description of the attempt to give blood is so emblematic, those lines, and I'm just heartbroken about this. In terms of your question, and having listened to your interview with Madeleine Albright, I just want to add something to what she said. And that is this. In the past, Osama bin Laden and other terrorists who do not represent national governments, a distinction which is critically important, but are sheltered in various countries in the world, including Afghanistan, sometimes North Korea, Iraq, Libya, have played this shell game about where the government that shelters them and protects them says, well, we don't know where they are. I think it is absolutely essential for the United States to lead an international effort now that makes clear that any country which shelters people is part of an act of war against the United States. The United States, Paula, cannot make the response alone. It is true, as Madeleine said, that we have the finest military force in the world. And I've been privileged to work with them for over 30 years in Vietnam, in Bosnia, and all over the world. But I will tell you that unless we have international united front of the European allies, the Russians, the Chinese, and I want to stress this, the moderate Arab states, which must close ranks to get the extremists who are behind this, we're not going to be able to succeed. This is the beginning, after we get through the rescue phase, after we find out how the security failure occurred that you referred to, that Wolf Blitzer referred to earlier, we're going to have to turn to an absolutely non-stop diplomatic effort to create the pressure behind which we can take the necessary military action against this act of war.
All right, I hear what you're saying, Ambassador, but it was Henry Kissinger who said earlier on today that we will be able to, or the United States at least, will be able to judge its friends by their level of support in trying to figure out who unleashed this fury today. What, though, realistically, do you think will happen in terms of resistance from some of these countries?
I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. I heard the interview with Henry Kissinger, and he and I are in full agreement on this. Any government which shelters the people who did this has to be held equally responsible for it as an act of war. And we are going to have to mobilize an international coalition for that position as we prepare to take the necessary military responses. And I know that Henry agreed with that because I listened to the interview.
Oh, no, I don't think I'm saying that anybody has misinterpreted the interview here, but I think there has been some suggestion by other guests that you may not get complete support here.
No, I don't know whether we'll get complete support or not. The Taliban is denying any influence in this thing, but all the evidence seems to suggest that. John King and others on your excellent coverage have suggested that the administration is 90% sure it's Osama bin Laden. If some countries don't participate, let them understand that they're joining a coalition of terrorists who have declared war on the United States. The key nations involved are going to be the moderate Arab states, the Russians, and the Chinese, and other countries which must isolate the cause of this. Osama bin Laden is not a government, but if he is indeed, as the administration appears to believe, behind this, anyone trafficking with him should be on notice that that is tantamount to an act of war by a government. And I talked this afternoon to the Secretary General of the UN, Kofi Annan, who is trying to deal with the consequences of this for the UN. He's going to have to decide whether to postpone or cancel some major UN meetings that are coming up in New York, a children's summit in 10 days. And he has been talking to Arab leaders, and I think he will be very supportive of this. The UN will meet in General Assembly tomorrow to start the condemnation process, and we're going to have to conduct diplomacy alongside rescue and finally decide what the correct military response is.
Mr. Holbrooke, we're going to have to leave it there this evening. Thank you very much for your insights and some of your poignant thoughts on what it was like to have once worked in one of those buildings that no longer exists. Joining me right now is Jeff Greenfield, who has some thoughts on the magnitude of what was witnessed here today. I know Senator Dodd earlier today compared this to the equivalent of the bombing of Pearl Harbor.
Right, and you know, he said, I don't think that overstates it. We may find out it will understate it. When Franklin Roosevelt told us that many American lives were lost on that December 8th speech, he was talking about 2,400 American servicemen and women. Unless a miracle happened 2.5 miles south of here, we are looking at a death toll that could dwarf that. The largest act of violence in American history, Oklahoma City, 168 dead. More people than that died just in the plains. And when you and I as New Yorkers look and we realize the landscape of New York has changed, the Empire State Building is once again the largest building, I would suggest to you the landscape of America has changed. We are going to wake up tomorrow in a different country. Our luck has run out. 6 people died at the World Trade Center in '93. We saved thousands more because the buildings didn't collapse. We averted terrorist acts in the past, not today. And I think we will not get on an airplane the same way again. We will not feel the same way about our security again. I looked at some numbers, Paula. The largest number of American dead ever in one day in this country was Antietam, the Civil War battle in Maryland in 1862, 22,000 dead. I hope to God we don't approach that number when all is said and done, but we're going to be possibly in that ballpark. And I think tomorrow, in some ways, may even be a worse day than today because the sheer magnitude of this event has kind of got everybody just excited and wondering. Tomorrow, the reality sets in.
And I think you also talked earlier today how that reality turns from a sense of shock and in some cases a sense of outrage.
We've already heard how
absolutely been handed this country.
And one of the biggest issues we're going to be facing is drawing the line between a response that equals the horror of what was done and restraint.
All right, got to cut you off here and go back quickly to Wolf Blitzer. I think Dick Armey is joining you.
Right, Paula. Just to remind our viewers that in a little bit more than a half an hour from now, President Bush will be in the Oval Office to address the American public. He's preparing his remarks right now, but our congressional correspondent, Jonathan Karl, is up on Capitol Hill, and he has the House Majority Leader, Dick Armey, with him. John?
Well, Wolf, an amazing day up here, and we just had about 200 members of Congress, Democrats, Republicans, senators, and members of the House on the steps of the Capitol with a message. Now, we have here the Majority Leader, Dick Armey, Republican leader in the House of Representatives. Mr. Armey, you were one of those in the top leadership of the Congress that were whisked away from the Capitol this morning to a secure location, a classified location. What was it like in that room all day today?
Well, we had the bipartisan leadership of both the House and the Senate. We were, of course, obviously, like everybody in America, seeking information, trying to understand exactly what's happening, where is it coming from, who's responsible, and how do we respond, measuring the threat to the nation and preparing ourselves to bring the members of Congress back to work at the appropriate time under the right circumstances and make the point that I made earlier. You may scar democracy, but you don't shut it down. We'll be back to work tomorrow. We think of this as a horrible criminal act. It is just inhumane. It's insane. And the American House and Senate, the Congress of this nation, as the President of this nation, will address that tonight. We will address the nation's business this week, and we will continue the process of finding the people who are responsible and bringing them to justice.
Now, I understand that at least 4 times during the day, the Vice President briefed the members of the leadership that were in that room at that classified location. What did you learn about that 4th plane, the plane that landed in western Pennsylvania?
Well, we learned some things about that. At this point, the information is classified. It is clear that we do have a good investigation going forward. We are gathering information. There is a confidentiality on what we know, but we do know that this is a serious, premeditated crime, and that I can say without any doubt or hesitation is an international crime, and we will be able to find the people responsible in America. I believe, with the cooperation of all civilized nations, will bring these people to justice.
Now, over the Capitol Police radios this morning, there was a report that there was a plane headed for the Capitol building. What can you tell us about that? Was the Capitol in danger at any time during the day?
I don't know. We've tried to distill exactly what that report might have been. It could have been somebody's interpretation of the heading of either the plane that went to the Pentagon or the plane that went down in Pennsylvania. But there was a concern about the Capitol that caused Capitol Police, I think correctly and prudently, to vacate the building.
All right. Well, Mr. Leader, I thank you very much for joining us. And Wolf, tomorrow, both the House and the Senate will reconvene. Very much this message that wants to be sent here is that terrorism will not stop the people's business, the work of the Congress from going forward.
All right, Jonathan Karl on Capitol Hill, thank you very much, and thank Mr. Army as well. I want to bring in Senator Bob Graham of Florida. He's the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Of course, he's been receiving regular briefings throughout the day. We're hearing a lot of suspicions, Senator Graham, about who may have been responsible. Can you share what you know about that responsibility with our viewers?
I would agree with Madeleine Albright. It's premature at this point to be identifying who the prime suspect might be. The number of potential suspects based on the complexity of this operation is relatively small, and I think we will soon be able to identify who the culprit is, but tonight is not tonight.
Has anybody definitively made any conclusions in the briefings with you and your colleagues about responsibility? Because, as you know, a lot of finger pointing at Osama bin Laden has been going on throughout the day.
No, at this point there has not been a single primary suspect identified.
Given the nature of this operation, the highly coordinated hijacking of these 4 airliners, is there some suspicion as well in the U.S. intelligence community that perhaps some government may also have been involved?
Again, it's premature to try to determine who did it and who their collaborators might have been. One thing we do know is that we are going to, as a result of this and other incidents, reassess our ability to identify and prevent this kind of event in the future. Right now, we're in the stage of responding to a horrendous event rather than where we should be, which is congratulating on ourselves in the fact that we identified and were able to interdict the culprits before they were able to act.
One of your colleagues on the Intelligence Committee, Senator Orrin Hatch of Utah, told us earlier today that as far as he had been informed, there was no advance warning whatsoever that these attacks were about to take place. Is that what you're hearing as well?
Yes. There had been a general heightening of concern about the potential of terrorism over this summer, but no operational information that would have allowed